You want to know the truth about avoidance after a breakup. They may look cold, distant, detached, like they've moved on and you meant nothing. But let me break this myth for you right now. They hurt too. They just hide it better than most. Let's be real. Avoidants don't process pain like the rest of us. They don't text their friends crying at 3 a.m. or post vague heartbreak quotes on Instagram. No. Their pain is hidden in silence. It's buried under distractions, overthinking, and a desperate need to feel in control again. If you've ever loved an avoidant, you probably walked away thinking they never cared. But deep down, that's not true. They cared in their own way, quietly, fearfully, inconsistently. And when it ends, they don't grieve openly. But they grieve hard. They'll pretend they're fine. They'll dive into work. Maybe hit the gym obsessively. They'll avoid everything that reminds them of you. And most of all, they'll avoid themselves. Because facing the pain means facing the fact that they lost something that mattered. And that's terrifying for someone who's already wired to run from emotional exposure. So if you're sitting there wondering, did they ever miss me? Are they hurting too? Listen closely. Yes, they are, but they will not tell you. You will not see it on their face. You might never get closure. But that doesn't mean their heart isn't breaking in silence. They scroll through old photos. They hear your laugh in random moments. They catch themselves checking your profile before deleting the app. And in the stillness of the night, when there's no one to perform for, they feel it. Here's what I want you to take away. Don't confuse silence for peace. Don't mistake detachment for healing. And don't let their composure convince you that you didn't matter. Some people hurt behind locked doors and avoidance. They're the masters of that. So give yourself the closure. You loved them. They probably loved you too. But love alone isn't always enough when fear runs the show. They're hurting quietly. Secret when an avoidant partner goes silent after a breakup. It's easy to assume they don't care, that they've moved on, that the end of the relationship didn't touch them the way it shattered you. But the truth is, their silence isn't empty. It's loud, it's layered. It's full of things they're too afraid to say and too overwhelmed to process. Silence for an avoidant is not healing, it's hiding. It's the only way they know how to deal with the emotional chaos they don't have the tools or courage to face directly. When someone avoids vulnerability as a core defense mechanism, emotional pain becomes an uninvited threat. They don't lean into it, they don't confront it, they shut it out. That doesn't mean the pain isn't there. In fact, it often hurts more because it has no outlet, no conversation, no closure, just internal pressure building in a system already wired for shutdown. Silence becomes the armor they wear not because they're indifferent, but because they're emotionally overwhelmed and unequipped to deal with the fallout of heartbreak in a healthy, open way. Behind the silence is a storm. You just don't see it, and because avoidants are often highly functional, they might appear composed, even thriving, in the days or weeks after a breakup. But that composure is a mask. It's a performance for themselves and others. Internally, they may be replaying every conversation, doubting their decisions, feeling shame, or longing for connection, all while refusing to reach out or express it. That contradiction between what they feel and what they show becomes their prison. This is what makes avoidant heartbreak so confusing for the person who loved them. You were likely looking for signs of emotion, signs that you mattered, that they're hurting like you are. But they won't cry in front of you. They won't send a late-night message admitting they miss you. They won't fight for the relationship in a traditional way. Instead, they retreat deeper into themselves, silencing not only you, but also parts of their own emotional world. It's not peace, it's suppression. Their silence is not an absence of pain, it's a denial of it. It's a reflex response that's been reinforced over years, maybe even decades. In childhood, they likely learned that expressing needs or emotions came at a cost, so now they default to withdrawal. When they hurt, they disappear, not because it's easier, but because it's what they know. They may be lying in bed at night replaying memories, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you hate them if they ruin something good, and yet still say nothing. That silence can break your heart, but know this, it's breaking theirs too. So when you're sitting there trying to decode what their stillness means, understand it's not a sign that they didn't feel. It's a sign that feeling is what scares them most. Their silence is loud, deafening even. It says everything they can't bring themselves to say out loud, lie. And they'll never say it out loud, but that doesn't make it any less real. When an avoidant partner goes silent after a breakup, it's easy to assume they don't care, that they've moved on, that the end of the relationship didn't touch them the way it shattered you. But the truth is, their silence isn't empty. It's loud, it's layered, it's full of things they're too afraid to say and too overwhelmed to process. Silence for an avoidant is not healing, it's hiding. It's the only way they know how to deal with the emotional chaos they don't have the tools or courage to face directly. When someone avoids vulnerability as a core defense mechanism, emotional pain becomes an uninvited threat. They don't lean into it, they don't confront it, they shut it out. That doesn't mean the pain isn't there. In fact, it often hurts more because it has no outlet, no conversation, no closure. Just internal pressure building in a system already wired for shutdown. Silence becomes the armor they wear not because they're indifferent, but because they're emotionally overwhelmed and unequipped to deal with the fallout of heartbreak in a healthy, open way. Behind the silence is a storm. You just don't see it, and because avoidants are often highly functional, they might appear composed, even thriving in the days or weeks after a breakup, but that composure is a mask, it's a performance for themselves and others. Internally, they may be replaying every conversation, doubting their decisions, feeling shame, or longing for connection, all while refusing to reach out or express it. That contradiction between what they feel and what they show becomes their prison. This is what makes avoidant heartbreak so confusing for the person who loved them. You were likely looking for signs of emotion, signs that you mattered, that they're hurting like you are, but they won't cry in front of you. They won't send a late-night message admitting they miss you. They won't fight for the relationship in a traditional way. Instead, they retreat deeper into themselves, silencing not only you, but also parts of their own emotional world. It's not peace, it's suppression. Their silence is not an absence of pain, it's a denial of it. It's a reflex response that's been reinforced over years, maybe even decades. In childhood, they likely learned that expressing needs or emotions came at a cost, so now they default to withdrawal. When they hurt, they disappear, not because it's easier, but because it's what they know. They may be lying in bed at night replaying memories, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you hate them, if they ruined something good, and yet still say nothing. That silence can break your heart, but know this, it's breaking theirs too. So when you're sitting there trying to decode what their stillness means, understand it's not a sign that they didn't feel. It's a sign that feeling is what scares them most. Their silence is loud, deafening even. It says everything they can't bring themselves to say out loud. Avoidants rarely sit still after a breakup. Instead of allowing themselves to feel the weight of the loss or reflect deeply on the relationship, they throw themselves into distractions, often obsessively. Work becomes their sanctuary, the gym becomes their therapy, and to-do lists become their emotional escape route. It's not because they've moved on. It's because they're trying to outrun something they don't know how to face, the uncomfortable, uncontrollable chaos of heartbreak. This obsessive need to stay busy isn't about growth or moving forward. It's a smokescreen. It's about survival. Avoidants don't lean into vulnerability. They lean into action. Emotional discomfort triggers a panic within them, and instead of sitting with that discomfort, they try to suppress it through motion. Productivity becomes a coping mechanism, a form of emotional anesthesia. If they're focused on a promotion, a fitness goal, or a packed calendar, then maybe, just maybe, they won't have to confront the silence you left behind or the pain they buried under pride and fear. You'll see them suddenly passionate about things they ignored during the relationship. They'll post about new habits, goals, or accomplishments with a subtle tone of "I'm doing just fine." But beneath that surface, there's often a fragile sense of self trying to repair itself through external validation. They may even convince themselves that they're healing, but what's really happening is emotional bypassing. They're not processing the breakup. They're avoiding it by disguising their pain as progress. This constant movement becomes their emotional shield. They structure their days to leave no space for stillness because stillness brings thoughts and thoughts bring feelings. And for avoidance, feelings are threatening. They don't just hurt, they destabilize. So instead, they pack their schedule, change their routine, and dive headfirst into anything that offers a sense of control. They don't want to feel powerless in the face of loss, so they build a life around avoiding the very thing they need to face, their own emotional truth. Underneath this hyperproductivity is often deep inner turmoil. The more intensely they avoid their pain, the more disconnected they become from themselves. That disconnection doesn't heal over time, it festers. It creates a sense of numbness, a chronic low-grade sadness that lingers even when everything looks fine on the outside. They might not cry, but they'll feel the void in moments they can't quite explain. When they're alone in a crowd, wide awake at night, or listening to a song that reminds them of you. So while you're grieving openly and wondering how they're already over it, know this: their hustle is often hiding heartbreak. Their new routine is a form of emotional camouflage. They're not healed, they're hiding in motion, and until they stop running from their feelings, they'll keep spinning in circles, busy but not better. Avoidants don't process pain by feeling it. They try to outwork it, but no matter how fast they move, pain has a way of catching up. Avoidants don't just avoid people, they avoid pain. After a breakup, one of the most telling signs that they're hurting is how quickly and completely they begin to remove any trace of you from their daily life. They stop listening to the music you once shared, take different routes to avoid familiar places, delete your photos, unfollow or mute you on social media, and do everything they can to eliminate reminders. At first glance, it may seem cold or indifferent, but in reality, it's the exact opposite. These actions are driven not by a lack of feeling, but by the overwhelming presence of it. The pain is there, it's just being pushed down so hard that anything that threatens to bring it back to the surface must be eliminated immediately. This is a classic emotional survival strategy for someone with avoidant tendencies. Reminders of you are reminders of vulnerability, and vulnerability is what they fear most. To sit with a memory, to let it linger, would mean facing the feelings they've tried to suppress their entire lives: loss, regret, attachment, longing. Those feelings can make them feel weak, exposed, or out of control. So instead of allowing that emotional flood to come, they try to slam the emotional door shut. Out of sight, out of mind. That's the goal, even if it never really works. What makes this especially painful for the person left behind is how sudden and thorough it often is. One day you're in their life, and the next it's like you were never there. The shared playlists, inside jokes, photos, and little routines seem to vanish overnight. It can feel like you were erased, but it's important to understand that this isn't about you being unimportant. It's about them trying to protect themselves from the emotional discomfort that follows meaningful attachment. Avoidants are incredibly sensitive beneath the emotional armor. They don't want to revisit the feelings because they don't know how to regulate them. If they see your face pop up unexpectedly or hear a song that reminds them of a vulnerable moment, it can trigger a spiral of internal conflict. So rather than risk emotional overwhelm, they clear the deck. They curate their environment to be sterile, predictable, and emotionally safe. They think that by cutting off access to reminders, they'll also cut off access to pain. But emotions don't work that way. Avoiding reminders doesn't erase the bond. It just buries it. That grief still lingers in their system, often manifesting later in subtle ways. A dream about you, a wave of nostalgia they can't explain, or an unexplained sadness that hits them during quiet moments. They might not connect the dots, but the avoidance catches up eventually. All the things they've pushed away, the love, the connection, the memories, they resurface, not as direct pain, but as restlessness, loneliness, or the sense that something meaningful slipped through their fingers. So when you notice them erasing you from their world, don't take it as proof they're unaffected. Take it as proof they're trying, desperately, to stay afloat in emotions they never learned how to swim in. After a breakup, one of the most hidden yet powerful signs that an avoidant is hurting is how they watch from a distance. They won't text you, they won't call, and they definitely won't show up at your door with an apology, but they're there. Quietly, secretly, peeking into your world without letting you know. It could be checking your social media stories, scrolling through your profile late at night, or even rereading old texts when no one's around. Avoidants are masters at staying hidden while still staying connected, because it gives them a sense of control over a situation that made them feel exposed. They're terrified of vulnerability, and reaching out would mean opening themselves up to rejection, shame, or emotional accountability. But staying in the shadows feels safer. It gives them access to you without the risk. They get to see how you're doing, what you're posting, how you look, and whether you've moved on, all without having to admit that they still care. This behavior might seem contradictory, but it makes perfect sense through the lens of emotional avoidance. Watching from afar allows them to maintain emotional distance while still feeling tethered to something familiar. What makes this so complex is that they often convince themselves it doesn't mean anything. They'll justify the checking as just curiosity, or convince themselves they're simply bored. But the truth is, when they quietly look in on your life, it's rarely about curiosity. It's about longing. They miss you, but they don't know how to express that in a way that feels safe or manageable. So instead of connection, they choose observation. Instead of vulnerability, they choose distance. Sometimes, they don't even realize how often they do it. It becomes a habit, almost like a secret addiction. A quick profile check here, a story view there, all in the name of staying updated. But underneath it all is the pain of losing someone they still feel emotionally attached to. They won't like your photos or comment on your posts. They don't want to be seen, because being seen might invite questions or expectations they're not ready to face. But make no mistake, they're watching. And in their quiet observations is an entire world of unspoken grief, regret, and unresolved emotion. This behavior can be incredibly confusing for you if you're trying to move on. You may sense they're still lurking, but you get no validation. No words, no closure, just this haunting digital presence that never fully goes away. And that's exactly how avoidants prefer it. They want proximity without pressure, presence without participation. It gives them the illusion of connection without the cost of commitment. So while they may seem absent, their quiet checking in is often one of the biggest signs they're not as detached as they seem. They're still emotionally invested, even if they'll never admit it out loud. Watching from afar is their way of saying, "I still care," but only in the safest way they know how. Avoidants often internalize their pain after a breakup. While others cry, talk, or vent to friends, avoidants turn inward, locking their emotions behind an emotional wall that they rarely let anyone see behind. From the outside, it might appear as though they've moved on without so much as a crack in their composure. But inside, the emotional turbulence is real. Their hurt doesn't erupt, it simmers. It quietly twists itself into shame, self-doubt, regret, and emotional numbness. Instead of reaching out to process what happened, they often replay moments on a loop, blaming themselves silently while refusing to admit they care. Because avoidants are so uncomfortable with vulnerability, the idea of expressing their pain feels unbearable. Instead, they internalize it, analyze it, and try to compartmentalize it away. But in doing so, they often start turning their pain into self-directed criticism. They may think they were too closed off, too reactive, too emotionally distant. They might not articulate it, but that silent narrative builds within them, creating a sense of failure that sticks long after the breakup has passed. This internal struggle can manifest in subtle yet damaging ways. Sleep gets disrupted. They feel restless but don't understand why. Small things irritate them. They lose interest in activities they once enjoyed. They may even dive deeper into distractions or develop unhealthy coping habits just to avoid sitting with themselves. It's not that they don't feel the loss, it's that they don't feel safe acknowledging it. And that leaves them stuck in a loop, unable to move on, unwilling to go back, and emotionally paralyzed in the middle. What's even more complicated is that they often don't recognize this as heartbreak. Because they've spent so much of their lives avoiding emotional expression, the pain becomes something vague and hard to name. It doesn't come out as tears. It comes out as withdrawal, overthinking, irritability, or a general sense of emptiness. They may find themselves haunted by random memories of you at the most inconvenient times, while driving, while lying in bed, while doing the most mundane tasks. And yet, even then, they won't pick up the phone, because to do so would be to admit they're not okay. This inward hurting also prevents healing. Instead of talking it out or gaining perspective, they stay stuck in a solitary emotional vacuum where nothing gets processed. And the longer they sit with unspoken feelings, the heavier they become. Eventually, that weight shows up in their relationships with others, their work, their sense of self. It becomes a kind of silent grief that lingers like a shadow, coloring everything but never being acknowledged. So while avoidance may appear composed or indifferent after a breakup, the real story is often unfolding quietly beneath the surface. Their pain doesn't explode, it implodes. And they carry it with them, tucked away behind their independence and emotional distance, where no one can reach it, but where it never truly disappears. So if you've ever walked away from an avoidant wondering if they felt anything at all, let this be your answer. They did. They just didn't show it in ways you could see. Their silence, their distractions, their distance. Those were all signs of pain they didn't know how to express. Thank you for listening, for opening your heart to understand a truth that's often hidden behind walls. Healing begins when we stop personalizing someone else's coping and start recognizing that even in silence, emotion still speaks.